with him in a room there.
Good evening. And welcome to the American Antiquarian Society and our public program, Behind the Scenes of Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, an Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom with Ilyon Woo. We're here in Worcester in Antiquarian Hall with a robust audience watching us on YouTube as well. So we welcome those of you who are here with us in the hall and those of us who are watching on YouTube. We are on the ancestral homelands of the Nipmuc tribal community, who remain a vibrant presence here in central Massachusetts. And tonight's program is sponsored jointly by the American Antiquarian Society and the Worcester Black History Project. And I'm delighted to welcome the director of the Worcester Black History Project, Deborah Hall, who's here tonight with us. I'm Scott Casper, the president of the American Antiquarian Society. We have some newcomers here tonight, both in person and on YouTube, so I want to say a few words of introduction to the Antiquarian Society, which is a national research library located in Worcester, Massachusetts. We cultivate a deeper understanding of the American past, grounded in the primary sources, the print and manuscript sources that we've been collecting here for more than 200 years. We foster a broad community of inquiry through programs like this one and also through generous support for scholarship. And we welcome scholars and readers from around the world, around the country, and right here in Worcester to come here and use our collections for your research questions and also to use our digitized collections, many of which are available online. We thank you for joining us here this evening. For those of you who are joining us virtually on YouTube, my colleague Amanda Kondek is in the room here, and she'll be sharing a few notes on how to comment and ask questions in the YouTube chat, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. Amanda will also be posting links and relevant information in the chat throughout the program. And tonight's program, after tonight, is being recorded and will be put on our YouTube site. So if folks want to go back and watch it later or recommend it to their friends, it'll be available that way as well. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome back to AAS a writer and scholar who has worked in the collections here for 2 decades. And has produced several marvelous books from her research. Ilyon Woo first came to AAS in the early 2000s as a Peterson Fellow to conduct research for her first book, which was entitled The Great Divorce, a 19th century mother's extraordinary fight against her husband, the Shakers, and her times. And that book appeared in 2010. Over the years, Dr. Woo has written for the Boston Globe and the Wall Street Journal. She's received support for her research from the Whiting Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, among other organizations. And in regard to her first book, The Great Divorce, one reviewer wrote that neglected history comes alive in this meticulously researched and compelling story. That sentence could just as easily be applied to Ilyon Woo's brand new book, Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, an Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom, which she has returned to AAS to discuss with us. And tonight we have a real treat as she takes us behind the scenes of researching and writing this book. And this book has a Worcester story as well. So there's a local angle to this as well as national significance. This book has already received tremendous attention, including a profile on CBS Sunday Morning, and it just won a prize for the audiobook. It won the Earphones Award from AudioFile magazine for the audiobook version. So we are delighted and thrilled to have Ilyon Woo back at AAS. Welcome back, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Scott. Thank you for having me here, American Antiquarian Society, and special thanks to the Worcester Black History Project. I'm delighted to be here. So in 1849, an extraordinary couple came to this town, William and Ellen Craft. They came here to Worcester to share their story, as I discovered for the first time with the world. And I just want to pause for a moment to consider how remarkable this was, because this was a month after they had fled slavery, 1,000 miles from Macon, Georgia, to the north. The safest thing for them to have done would have been to go straight to Canada, which was their original plan, or perhaps change their names, hide somewhere, maybe go to Boston at least. Instead, they chose to tell their story publicly here in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm delighted to honor them here tonight at the American Antiquarian Society, which has been such a special place for me. So the American Antiquarian Society, and here you see my dear friend Lynn Bassett, who you'll hear more about later. This is a place where the magic happens, as I'll discuss. It's a place where historical mysteries get unlocked, sometimes solved. It's a place of convening and community. I researched 2 books here, and I will say that the stories that I have told would not be the same. In fact, they might not even exist if it weren't for the American Antiquarian Society. So today I want to take you sort of behind the scenes for some of my research here. And I'm really excited about this because I know that this is a nerdy crowd, and so I can just completely geek out on all the historical details. I want to use the story of the crafts to reveal both the abundance of the archives and also its limitations. The model I'm going to use here for tonight is the grand panorama. So these were gigantic paintings. I mean, imagine something that stretches from that end to this end here. A painting that might unfurl. The lights are low. William and Ellen Craft, if you were in England, which they did this later on, might be in front of you. William Wells Brown might be in front of you, telling a story. This thing may or may not be moving, but they're pictures that are being lit up little by little. So for the next 40 minutes or so, I am going to take you into a kind of panorama of my own with a visual pathway of my archival journey with the crafts. So what I'm going to do, I will begin by giving you a sort of orientation into the story, the craft story in brief, and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty in 2 categories. First, travel, exploring such questions as what was it like to move in space in the crafts time, and second, clothing. What was it like for Ellen Craft, featured here, to don a man's clothes? And I'll close with reflections on what the archives can reveal to us so abundantly against what they also cannot, and how we might begin to address that difference. So the crafts in brief, who are they? William and Ellen Craft are an enslaved couple. Ellen, here you see on the left, we have many more available pictures of her than we do of William, was a skilled dressmaker. William was a talented artisan. And they considered each other husband and wife. They escaped, however, disguised as master and slave. Ellen had a very fair complexion, and she used this to her advantage, impersonating a rich, white, disabled man, while William played the part of her slave. Their 1,000-mile journey was really only just the beginning. So this is their book. They wrote this narrative in 1860. It's called Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom. And for me, my own journey with the crafts began with their remarkable writing. It's a reading moment that I've tried to conjure repeatedly as I've journeyed myself telling the story of this book. And it's a reading moment that I'll never forget. I was in Star East Asian Library at Columbia University. I was assigned this narrative. It was actually a photocopied narrative, so it didn't look as beautiful as this. But something about this narrative just sort of shook me to my core. It was a page turner. There's no doubt about that to begin with. The crafts talk about this incredible sort of road trip odyssey that they make with twists and turns like you couldn't believe. But there's also a voice and tales of tremendous loss, especially losses that the crafts each experienced as children. And as much as there's wonder in the details, many of them that I could verify, as I'll discuss later, the story also left out a lot. And it made me wonder, especially who was left behind. Who were the people that the crafts had loved and had to leave behind? Who were those people who had enslaved them? What was that world that they had fled? Why did they flee when they did? They fled in a remarkable hurry. They say they conceived this plan in 4 days, and then it took another 4 days to execute the journey. So why so fast? Was there something driving them beyond their general desire to escape freedom? Were there specific circumstances? I had smaller questions as well. I wanted to know, like, what was it like to travel on a train at this time? What did that smell and look and feel like? What did the clothes feel like on the body? My goal was to put these questions in conversation with one another, to illuminate the extraordinary using the ordinary. So where do you go to find these details, both extraordinary and ordinary? Well, right here, the American Antiquarian Society. So this is a thrilling place to do research. It's a place where you can hold these original documents, books, and papers in your hands. Not too much, because you'll get in trouble. But you can. There's nothing like actually seeing a newspaper. I mean, you can read them online. They're all available digitally. But when you have these massive things, and they, somebody will come out very solemnly with this giant book and put it in front of you. I don't know, for me, there's always a little chill or a little thrill that happens when I experience that moment. Not only that, but the experts. So people here, it's like, you can ask any kind of question and they can help you figure it out. Much easier than trying to do that on your own. And if they don't know, they inevitably will know somebody to point you to. So I highly recommend this archival researching experience. And what I'd like to do now is to invite you along for some of my own journey. So the first part, travel. So travel is, the journey, the route is really important to the crafts. They are not going by Underground Railroad. They are not hiding. They are not moving by night and sort of laying low by day. They are going on steamships, on trains, on these real actual railroads. And you see here, this is the steamship Cambria, which left from Boston. This ended up being the start of their, Boston was the start of their transatlantic journey. You can see how dangerous it was. They're riding this transportation revolution that is actually very new. Information revolution, transportation revolution. In fact, there's worldwide democratic revolt that's all going on at this time, and the crafts intersect with them all. But the trains were new. The Macon trains were only a couple years old, and things exploded. Trains exploded, steamships exploded. The fact that they were able to make this journey at all, making all their stops, was pretty incredible. You can see, when I pictured the trains from this area, I pictured these like massive things. They were not that big. I'm not a very big person, as you can see. And that is me. I'm standing next to an 1840s train. These were small vehicles. So what the crafts tell us about travel is pretty minimal. They say they went through such and such cities. They don't tell you what's going on outside the window. They don't tell you where they ate or where they might have stopped. This is the stuff, the nitty-gritty that I wanted to know. So to do that, I came to the Antiquarian Society and became kind of like a 19th century traveler. So you see up there in the top left, these railroad and steamboat guides. So using these, you can actually figure out all the stops that they made, recommendations for how to make the switches. There are incredible switches between the various vehicles, timetables. Everything is sort of laid out. And using this, I could actually verify that the chronology of events that the crafts describe in their narrative, which seemed really compressed to me, that was all actually accurate. The maps here at the American Antiquarian Society are amazing. And this is just an example of a railroad map. And you can see the crafts were actually supposed to just make this journey in 3 stops. They were supposed to go from Macon to Philadelphia, Macon to Savannah by steam train. Then they were supposed to go from Savannah to Charleston by a second steam train. By steamboat. And then a second steamer would have taken them from Charleston all the way up to Philadelphia. What happened, though, was that second steamboat did not run. And instead, they had to follow the mails on this overland mail route. And you can see the tracks that go up on that purple line all the way across the east there. I can't even begin to break that down for you, but that's how they had to go. And look how complicated that was. I started to understand more of the complications of this journey when I looked at travel accounts. Especially British travelers were really great because they were complaining all the time. So they're telling you everything that's not working, all the food that's bad, or, these misconnections, or how this isn't, So I used them. And using the three of these, I was able to sort of create, get these different camera angles into the craft's journey. So why is this important? For me, what this showed is, look at this abundance of information that I have from the AAS to be able to tell the story. The crafts did not have any of this. They had to make that crazy purple journey without any assistance. And even if they had these materials, they had been denied literacy. That's one of the reasons why they were denied literacy, so that they wouldn't have this information, wouldn't be able to find these kinds of escape routes. And yet they did, which to me is just, again, truly remarkable. I'm going to focus now on steamships. So as I said, steamships, they were supposed to have two steamships journeys. Steamships were supposed to be their main mode of transportation out of the South. Their first steamship ride was the most harrowing. So by the time they get on their steamship in Savannah, they've left Macon. They've gotten on this train. They've actually encountered 3 people who already know them. They've managed to get past that, and you can read the story to get the heart-thumping details. And Ellen has been able to survive largely by feigning disability and just kind of, you get on a train and you tune out and you go on the rest of that journey. They arrive in Savannah. The plan is pretty much the same. They're going to try the strategy of avoidance. This doesn't work on a steamboat because steamboats are different kinds of traveling spaces. They are more heavily raced and classed and gendered spaces. Ellen, as a gentleman, is going to have to go into a gentleman's saloon, and she's going to have to go into a berth. She's going to have to sleep overnight with men. And the trouble seems to begin almost as soon as she steps foot onto that steamer. They get there at the last possible minute. The bell's rung. They're in the door. William's assisting Ellen into the space. And Ellen, almost kind of comically, makes a beeline for her berth. That would be great if they left her alone there, right? That doesn't happen because you're supposed to be social aboard a steamer. A gentleman is supposed to be social aboard a steamer. And so people are saying, what's wrong with this guy? Why is he doing this? And so she has to make a new plan and she has to interact. And that's just the beginning because a slave trader at one point wants to buy William off her. So it's a harrowing journey. The crafts tell us that. They tell us the adventure part of it. What I wanted to know was, what was this steamship actually like? I kind of conceived of my role as being to try to create an orchestral score for this incredible melody that the crafts has written. So I wanted to create the scene. I wanted to show what was around. What I pictured was something like you see on the left. This is like, wedding cake steamer with several tiers. And so I pictured this big grand space. That was actually not the case. Thanks to another scholar, Barbara McCaskill, who unearthed a newspaper account by a man actually who had his eye on the crafts the whole time. We learned the name of the vessel that they took, and it's called the General Clinch. And as you can see, it's much smaller, it's much plainer than at least what I had going in my imagination. So, once I have the name of the ship, once I have the dates of the journey, and I've been able to map this out using those travel schedules that I got from the AAS, then I can get all nerdy at the AAS with the steamship boats. Steamship and railroad people are really organized, and there's a man named Eric Heil who did some research on the General Clinch. And you can see this is my EndNote. I'm showing you like all my like inside stuff here, but this is I used EndNote to keep track of all my research. And I wrote, "Yay, Volume 6, page 125. There's one deck." I'm getting a picture of this as being a single deck steamer. So for me, this was really mind blowing. And why was it mind blowing? Because it made me picture the ship as not this big space where Ellen might have sort of slipped in here or William might have slipped in there. It was a small space. It was a claustrophobic space, which made that impersonation, that performance, all the more important. They were going to have to be seen at very, very close range. Something more changed as I looked at this ship. When you have the name of the ship, when you have the date of travel, you can also get slave manifests. So these are records kept by people who were commodifying human beings, bringing them aboard ships like the General Clinch. And one of the things that I learned was that the General Clinch was precisely the type of vehicle that slavers preferred to take because it was plain, small, fast. So unfortunately, there are some holes in the record, so I didn't have the exact day when the crafts were on the ship. But I did find this record from the very week that they were on board the General Clinch. And I've highlighted in red the name Sarah. A little girl named Sarah was trafficked here the week the crafts went through. She was 3 years old, 2 feet, 6 inches tall. When I see names like Sarah's, I take a pause and I have a line that I've sort of ended up saying to myself and saying to the person, which is, I see you in history, I feel you in time. Just to honor for a moment somebody else who was riding the ship the week that the crafts did and whose story is not told. But for me, this was, again, it changed the entire picture. Because you're seeing the crafts, you're seeing their adventure, you're seeing the stage of the ship, but you're also seeing other people who were almost certainly below decks when the crafts were traveling. And this is the kind of eye-opening that happened for me again and again at the American Antiquarian Society. Our second topic of discussion is clothes. So dress is obviously a crucial part of the crafts escape. And you can see this person on the left has no relationship to the story. It just happens to be a man from the exact same period, who you can see, like the pictures next to each other, that Ellen Craft has done a pretty amazing impersonation. At 4 in the morning on this December day in 1848, when it was dark in Macon, Georgia, she put on the shirt, the vest, the hat, the shoes, the jacket, the glasses. These were the elements of her disguise. So as soon as I knew that I was going to have a topic like this that was so steeped in costume history, of course, I reached out to my friend Len Bassett. Len, if you're watching here, thank you. She has been such a huge part of this journey. And she gave me some really keen insights as I went along. So I made a couple discoveries. I should start with that. First, I learned that this is not the original outfit that Ellen Craft was wearing. This came as a surprise. I learned, so when the Crafts first arrived in Philadelphia, they were not safe. They had to go underground and they stayed with a Quaker family named the Ivanses. So I've been fortunate to be in touch with both Craft descendants and Ivans descendants. And it was the Ivans who pointed me to something from their family records which indicate that Ellen Craft was so scared of having any evidence of her escape on her that she actually abandoned the clothes before she even got to the Quaker home. What she had, however, were a pair of boots, and those were passed on. Unfortunately, they didn't survive, but they were passed on to the Quaker's son. So when we learn that this is not the actual outfit, what becomes all the more important are descriptions of the craft's outfit from the period. And that's where Lynn came in really, really handy. So I learned from one particular description, this one is actually kind of funny, where William is talking about the first time he saw Ellen. So he had, in this costume, he had actually bought different parts of her costume at different stores over 4 days to avoid getting anyone sort of suspicious. And Ellen sewed her own pants. So when she tries on the outfit. He's brought it for her. They have all the pieces. She puts on the outfit, and the vest is like way too long, to the point where he's looking at her and thinking, "I'm sorry, sweetie, this is not going to work." She's the one. It's a kind of humorously told moment. She's the one who actually says, "Actually, it's going to be fine because I'm going to wear a jacket over it. It'll cover it up." She's a dress person, so she knows. What I got from this, though, is that further support from Lynn and her friend David Rickman, who specialize in gentlemen's clothes, is that this is not. We get these lots of descriptions and memories of Ellen Craft as being super stylish as a gentleman, polished, looking high class. The clothes themselves don't say that. Her jacket isn't fitted to her; it's manufactured, and the proportions are a little bit off. I also asked Lynn about the glasses, because I thought, all right, she's wearing these green glasses. Is it kind of like rock star glasses? Does she look like, cool in these glasses? And actually, no, she did not. If you had colored glasses, Lynn said, if they're tinted yellow, it indicates syphilis. Hers were tinted green, which indicates that your eyes were strained from too much reading. So far from looking sort of stylish, naturally stylish and debonair, she's looking a little ill-suited and a little bit dorky. So how does this help us with the story? Well, what this did for me is it all the more magnified Ellen Craft's genius, because time and again she's described as being remarkably classy, remarkably well-dressed. She was able to affect all that through her performance, through her manners, through her speech. So another way of saying this is, it's not in this case the clothes that made the gentleman, it's Ellen Craft. I want to return to the spurs, however. So I got all excited about the spurs on the boots that Ellen Craft gave to the Quaker son. This was something I hadn't known before. They don't describe the boots in the narrative, but the Quakers say that this was a pair of spurred boots. And I thought, oh, spurs, it's like a little knife or something like that. Could that be used as a weapon? So, of course, I had to consult with Lynn, and she said, alas, no, the spurs would not have made a great weapon. That would have been very clumsy. But I still wanted to know more about spurs. Unfortunately, she has friends who are specialists in like every possible kind of clothing. So there is a spur expert, Sarah Rivers Cofield, and I was able to consult with her. She verified the fact that no, Ellen Craft wouldn't be doing some kind of jiu-jitsu move with a spur to like deter potential attackers. But I did learn some interesting things about spurs, which is a man who wears spurs is wearing spurs because he has horses that are fast. He's not using this on a workhorse. He's using this on horses that are meant for speed, for racing, for leisure, for pleasure. And he's also somebody who is willing to use pain, inflict pain on another body in order to move forward. So he means business. So these are signifiers of the spurs. And I guess the lesson learned for me is that sometimes we don't get what we hope for. I didn't get like the detachable spurs that could be used instead of amazing way. But if we're open to the sources, sometimes new meanings can emerge that can become even more powerful. The last part of my Lynn tribute here, and here you can see Lynn on the bottom, has to do with the covers of my book. So all these details, small and large, the little ones having to do with the dress, the travel, the costume, and everything, they help one tell a story, hopefully with more more drama and more flair than without, but they also shape the cover, the physical aspect of the book itself. That's what happened with me here. These are two versions of the cover. The final you see on the right, and the first one you see on the left. And you'll notice a couple differences. One is that William Craft is not the same, and that I owe to Lynn as well, because this is a picture of a man who I thought was William Craft that had been published in another book. And I thought it looked great, so I suggested this one be included on the cover. What surfaced pretty last minute was actually a second picture owned by the same person that was also supposed to be of William Craft. But what surprised me about that picture is that if the two men were supposed to be the same, the second man looked really young, probably too young to be William. And that made me wonder, do I have the right man? Well, how do you figure that out? You date the picture. How do you date the picture if there's nothing written on it? You ask somebody like Lynn, who can date a picture just by looking at people's hair and their clothes or their jewelry, all these little details. She can pull an entire story, entire history from a photograph. And that's what she did, actually. There's like a late night. She happened to be at a quilting conference with two other experts. And I got this message from her saying, I'm sorry, I'm here with these experts, and we're all looking at these pictures together, and I don't have the news you want to hear. This is not your man. So the news was disappointing, but it's all in service of accuracy and of getting this right, because it's essential to get this right. You'll see the steamship has changed. The original picture that the artist wanted to use had like the wedding cake like steamship. I had that substituted for the steamship General Clinch. Then I worried, what about the vegetation? Is that going to be right? Because you can't just switch out a ship and then not wonder about what it's going through. Fortunately, there too, Lynn had a friend who knew as much about vegetation as she knows about clothes. And she did verify that indeed this was a plausible landscape for where the General Clinch passed through. So these are just examples of the kinds of research that come out of a place like the American Antiquarian Society. And beyond Lynn, I've also received advice on this book from Manisha Sinha, who was a fellow at the same time as we were. And actually, the late Cindy Lobel introduced me to my agent. So in so many ways, the story has been completely transformed, and my ability to tell stories has been transformed by the American Antiquarian Society. So the final part of my presentation, I'd like to move from abundance to dearth, and what scholars have called an archival deficit. So as much as there's so much bounty in all these different details, whether it's spur history or travel or this and that, there are silences and gaps in the archives, especially having to do with the enslaved and with the people, for example, that William and Ellen Craft left behind. And always present in their story is the specter of loss, of possible separation, which both Crafts experience at very young ages. You can see an example of the disparity between what's available in the documentation around two women who played essential roles in Ellen Craft's early life. First, her mother, with whom she had a very close relationship, and second, her enslaving mistress. So Ellen Craft's first enslaver was her biological father, and he had a wife who was so annoyed, as they describe in their narrative, by her physical resemblance to her father and by her being mistaken for a member of the family, that she conspired to give Ellen Craft away as a wedding gift to her own biological daughter when that daughter got married at 18 years old. Neither Ellen's mother nor her enslavers are named in the narrative. Fortunately, we have these I have these from previous generations of scholars. When I went digging further with these names, I was able to find an incredible wealth of information about Eliza Cleveland Smith, wife of James Smith, who was Ellen's father. And you can even see both of their graves here. I knew what hymns she wanted to have sung when she died. I learned about her love for her children. I saw pictures of her children. I learned about her personality. I learned that her husband had ruddy cheeks and that he liked to cuss, but not in the company of women, that he liked to drink. You learn all kinds of detailed information about them. Meanwhile, Ellen's mother, Maria, whose name we know because Ellen told her story, we have very few traces of her. One of the ways in which we can get information about her, the major ways, is through the enslavers. So that's actually something that I'm grateful to for Eliza Cleveland Smith, is having this bounty of documentation through which we can get access, little bits, little glimpses into Maria. So this is Maria, age 48, valued at $500. This is Ellen's mother, as listed in the returns of James Smith. So when James Smith died, there was a whole tallying of his property, including his human property. And this is one of the few pieces of information that we have of Maria through the Smith family records. Thanks to Ellen telling her story, we have more, and you can read a happy ending in the book. But very often what you see when it comes to the history of enslaved are advertisements like this. It says Bib June sales. These kinds of advertisements run every day in the Southern papers. This is from a Macon paper. At the bottom you see highlighted, right above Hugh Craft, you see Hugh Craft highlighted. You see 3 Negroes, household furniture, pews number 55, 57, 58, 59, and 60 in the Presbyterian Church. Thomas Taylor versus Hugh Craft. In this case, we know who 2, at least, of these 3 Negroes are. We know that this is William Craft and his sister, Eliza, who were auctioned separately on a hot day in July. But what makes me wonder when I see advertisements like this is we know that William Craft had this whole other story and had this whole world, but how many other stories are lost to history? So how do we address this imbalance, this archival gap? One thing we can do is to squeeze the sources in different ways. For example, using Mr. Smith's histories to get somehow sideways to those that she enslaved. Be open to other expressions of history beyond the archives, especially oral histories, the stories of descendants too that are passed down. Expand our definition of what an archive is, and here I honor the work of Taya Miles, who models this beautifully in her story about Ashley Sack, All That She Carried. This is a nonfiction work, and I draw upon it as I try to illuminate the relationship between Ellen and Maria. We can also tell the story in a different way, and here's another former American Antiquarian Society fellow, I believe, Honoré Fanon Jeffers, and she wrote this beautiful, abundant novel, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. And you know, what's interesting in here, this is kind of an archival mystery. There's an archival mystery at the heart of it. So there's this just rich, multi-generational family history. And she actually begins with that. She opens, that's most of the story. But then towards the end, we get a little scrap from the archives. And what it made me realize is these lines are like lines of a terrible poem. They could be the page out of any sort of diary that you might see from the South. And what she does is she shows us that all of this huge bounteous world that she's created, it gets flattened to something like this terrible archival poem. So in a way, it's kind of the reverse of that three Negroes that I showed you. She's showing that abundance against this paucity. She's showing us new ways of opening up these kinds of texts. And I know that I, for one, will never look at any plain, simple 10-line bit of archival stuff quite in the same way again, thanks to her opening. So my own strategy is, because there's simply times when there's so much about one person, let's say Mr. Smith, and so little about another. How can I redress that? I can't give Maria anything more. I can't invent. I'm not going to fictionalize. But I can change the way I tell the story. I can look even down to the level of the grammar, look at the sentence, and look at who's the subject in the sentence, who owns the paragraph, who is the topic sentence, who owns the chapter. And in little ways like that, and bigger, as they accrue, we can tilt the axis by which these kinds of stories are told. A final move I would suggest is to engage in conversation, bringing more readers into the archives to interpret these materials anew. Which brings me back to the American Antiquarian Society again. So here's an image from a talk that Lynn Bassett did last year entitled Historically Hers, Revisiting American Girl Doll Stories Through the American Antiquarian Society Collections. So the American Antiquarian Society is the kind of place where new conversations can happen, where even as we look at the past, a new kind of history can be born, one that helps transform both our present and our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilyon, for an amazing talk about getting behind the scenes, showing us how a gorgeous book like this happens. Now we have an opportunity for those of you here in the room and those of you watching on YouTube to ask questions. So I have a mic here, and I'm happy to bring this mic to anybody in the room. Amanda is in the back following questions on YouTube. So if you just raise your hand, I will bring the mic to you in the room, and I'll be alternating between people in the room and people out on YouTube. So the floor is open, please. Don't be shy.
I wanted to know how Ellen Craft was able to speak in a way that didn't give her away as a female.
That's a really great question. I think initially she tried not to speak as much as possible. I mean, if you look at her dialogue in the early part of the narrative, she's single words, and at a certain point she does have to use a bigger voice. I don't know, honestly. There are no descriptions of her, the timbre of her voice, but I'm guessing that she sort of tried to drop it down as low as she possibly could.
Do they say how they were able to finance the passages and whatnot?
Yes, that was actually a really pressing question for them to answer on the abolitionist lecture circuit, because they had to really sort of establish their credibility. And I think lurking beneath all this was this question of, well, how did they, were they able to sort of honestly come by these items, the money for travel, all these kinds of things? People wanted to know. And the fact is that the Crafts were both able to earn money. William especially, we know that is documented. So he was a cabinet maker by trade, and he had worked out an arrangement with his enslaver, a young man named Ira Taylor, whereby he would collect a certain amount of money from this cabinet maker and hand it over to Ira Taylor every year. But then whatever hours outside of that, he was able to earn wages. So this wasn't legal, but it was it happened, especially in urban places like Macon. So he was able to earn $100 over 5 years by one newspaper report. And he did this both by working extra hours at the cabinet maker shop and also working at a hotel. And I think that hotel might have also played a role. I mean, when you're in a hotel, you're in a place where people are moving in and out, traveling. So he might have heard about different ways of travel and things like that as well. So when the Crafts actually go speak in places like Worcester, William Wells Brown, who's a self-emancipated man and kind of a star lecturer and a best-selling author, and he's kind of the one who shows them the ropes of how to tell the story. He's introducing them, and he's setting up, especially in Worcester, at the very first stop, the financial scenario. He's saying, look, this is how they earn the money to go on this escape, which is doing two things. It's answering, this curiosity question that people have in their minds, but it's also showing that the Crafts they're artisans, they're independent, they're resourceful. These are not the types of people who are going to become a burden, right? Because that's a fear that people had in the North. What about all these people coming up from the South? They're going to drain all our resources. No, the Crafts are incredibly capable, and they would be an asset to any community they join.
Not having read the book yet, were you able to determine in Worcester how long they were here and where they stayed? Did they stay with a private family or?
I wish I could have had some kind of diary of their travels. I mean, it's amazing. They go from place to place. We know that in Worcester, they came through Worcester more than once. This was an interesting place to come for a lot of reasons. I mean, there was a lot going on here politically, women's history. There was Black activist community here. It was an intersection of all these different kinds of railroads and things like that. And they came here repeatedly to speak. I don't know the details of where exactly they stayed. I know that they spoke at one point together with Abby Kelly Forrester and her husband. That's kind of amazing to imagine these two couples taking the lecture stage together. And I don't know if they might have stayed with them. So we don't have those kinds of details, but we do know that Worcester was a place where they felt safe and where they could change minds.
We'll go to YouTube and then we'll come up here.
Sure. So Joan McKenzie asks, what was the most surprising thing that you discovered?
This is really a research journey where I've had, it's like surprises at every possible turn. I've got like 50 million that are sort of jumping into my mind right now, but one I'll just say is I was surprised that they had a gun on their journey. That's something that they didn't write about. And the way I found out about that is looking at later 1870s accounts. They were involved in a libel suit, which I write about in my book, so I won't get into the gory details here. But in this libel suit, William says under oath, he testifies about the moment when he enters Philadelphia, a colored boarding house in Philadelphia. And in the book, in their narrative, they recount this moment in a kind of a humorous way. So they arrive at this abolitionist-friendly boarding house, and what they say is Ellen goes upstairs, Ellen and William together go upstairs. They pray. They come back down. She has changed, and there's kind of almost like a slapstick moment where the boarding house keeper's like, "Who are you? Where's your master?" And William says, "This is my master." And he's like, "No, like the master." And he's like, "This is the same person." And then they sort of explain the whole thing. So it's recounted humorously in the narrative. What William ends up saying under oath is actually that Ellen went upstairs, and then he put a gun out on the table, and he said, "This is who we are, and I'm prepared to use this." So that's a moment that definitely surprised me, to imagine that they could have been armed on this journey.
Yeah, you hear about like a green book that people had on the Underground Railroad, and they had a list of places where they could get something to eat and served. Did they have any support like that, or were they all on their own?
Well, I think there were certainly green books that were published in the age of the automobile that enabled people to, Black people who were traveling, to figure out what places might be hospitable, what places would be safe to stop for travel. there was no such guide for the quote unquote Underground Railroad, which was actually not a, contrary to its name, it wasn't sort of the super organized system. It was more, it's like a metaphor given to sort of a very loose association of people who are helping self-emancipated people like or freedom seekers like the Crafts along the way. But the Underground Railroad did not go that far into Georgia. There was no network down in Georgia. So that's one of the things that's really so remarkable about the Crafts and their story is that they didn't rely on anybody but each other in order to make their escape.
Amanda?
Yeah, so Erin Williams asks, what was Ellen's life like at the end of her life?
That's another wonderful question. At the very end of her life, and there are lots of different twists and turns throughout the narrative of the Crafts' lives. At the very end of her life, she asked to be buried under her favorite tree at this amazing site, which had once been the site of horror, a terrible plantation, but that had been transformed under the Crafts' own hands into a thriving educational and agricultural cooperative. By the time Ellen died, actually, there had been legal problems with that land. I mentioned a legal case earlier, and that was all wrapped up with, that was over this property, with the Crafts eventually lost. But some of her, I guess I would say some of her fondest, I think, later years were spent teaching, sharing her skills with others who had been now free from bondage, since this is post-emancipation. And that's where she chose to leave her body.
If I got the story right, at one point she's gifted as a wedding present to her half sister.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I followed that. Another comment, I thought that was very, it almost brought me to tears. The thing with the 3-year-old and the 2 6-foot, and that was really, it's beautiful if you could offer that about the way you kind of paused and just acknowledged that. And I was wondering, in your research, were there any other things that came to mind where your thought was maybe what's old is new again?
Sorry.
What's old is new again. That we see these things in the 1840s, and it maybe echoes of what's going on in society today. So, did you have any of those moments that might have like, oh, this is, history's repeating itself, or what's old is new again?
I think history is constantly repeating itself, and I wrote this book over, the last 6-7 years, and lots been going on in our country, and there are definitely resonances when you think about like how divided our capital is. I mean, it's kind of, if you look back then, I mean, that was really divided. People were actually just like, trying to hit each other or kill each other. But I want to go back actually to your comment about Sarah, because those moments for me are the ones in which I really feel that past coming through, is when I see children like Sarah, or another 10-year-old boy named Jerry, who was bought by the President of the United States, in the nation's capital. And you hear Polk saying, when he's of course, he's known for, President Polk is known for Manifest Destiny. His name is sort of associated with these big dreams. And, he did think about emancipating people in his will, but even as he was having these thoughts, he was buying and selling people from the White House. And he was specifically looking for, his biographers have shown, children, like children around 12. And this boy was, as young as 10. And when I see these records, I really do, like, it stops my heart, like when I'm reading them, and I tried to bring as many names as I could into the book. There's one moment in the story, in this reality, where Ellen Craft's enslaver, her biological half-sister's husband, stands to lose 106 enslaved people. And, you know, I had that picture of the this. You see a list like this, only it's filling up a lot more space. And originally, when I was trying to figure out how to honor these people, about whom I didn't know anything, and I couldn't find anything more. And I originally thought about maybe even just having a page in the book, almost like the Vietnam Memorial, where you have name after name. That didn't end up making the cut. But one thing happened for me actually while I was listening to the audiobook, which is every time these names are read, I feel that them said and expressed in time. And so just to hear those names aloud, you know, saying those names brought new meaning for me personally.
Amanda?
So Kayla Schreiber asks, you said that they came up with the plan in 4 days and that something might have prompted the escape. Did you find out what that event might have been?
Yes. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different things that are going on, both within the crafts' lives and their enslavers' lives, their financial problems. There's some actually also reports of them possibly having been a child. It's probably too. I don't think I can summarize it, but you can find my interpretations in the book.
I have a question about their becoming public speakers.
Mm-hmm.
So they leave Georgia, and several days later they're in Worcester. Or how long is it? Is it
It's been a couple of weeks.
couple of weeks?
Yes.
How is it that they become public speakers? Had they had any opportunities before they got to Worcester to speak before audiences? This seems like an enormous thing to do so immediately after they've escaped.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, it is really amazing that transformation that they make. And no, they wouldn't have had any opportunities like this in bondage in Macon, Georgia. So if you just imagine that they've made this incredible escape, they've had this lifetime of bondage, and they're with the Quakers in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. They're supposed to go to Canada, and they've modified this plan to go to Boston. And then this man, William Wells Brown, who I alluded to earlier, this incredibly charismatic, self-emancipated man, speaker, best-selling author, he hears about their story and he thinks, people need to hear this because this is going to change the whole anti-slavery scene. And he asks them, he says, I'm going to go speaking all over the country. Will you join me? They could have said no. You might say they should have said no. By going on the road with him, they're putting a mark on their back because they're still not safe once they get to the north. Just because they cross over into a free state, that doesn't protect them. The slave catchers can come and claim them at any time, even before the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, which actually sends slave hunters after them. They're in grave danger. And yet, they decide to go on the road. And yet, they use their actual names by which they were known in the South. I'm sure they have never been speaking in front of like hundreds of people before. But they're in Worcester. They choose Worcester as their first place. And then before long, they're in Boston Faneuil Hall, you know? And the place is just like packed. And there are lights on. And I mean, they're hearing these stories. They're hearing these voices. Douglas is there, rousing the crowd. I mean, these are scenes beyond imagining. And I just, I'm in awe, frankly, of them and their ability to have done this in the aftermath of their escape.
Amanda?
Did you find any other mistakenly assigned portraits, as you learned was the case with the presumed portrait of William Craft? Who else are we misnaming, as your research exchanges suggest?
Fortunately, that's the only one I can think of. Yeah. I can't think of any other mistakes. I mean, actually, we're just fortunate to have any pictures at all, frankly.
Yeah, not to correct you, but there was a series of stamps put out by the U.S. Post Office of cowboys and Indians and characters from the Old West. The first batch of stamps they put out had the wrong Black Brother rodeo driver rider in it. And so they had to reissue the stamps. They tried to pull back the ones that were wrong, and that caused a big controversy because now they're private property in people's stamp collections, and it made a big mess. But it has happened before.
It's good that they remedied that.
Yes.
Yeah. Are there other questions? Okay. So please join me in thanking Ilyon Woo for an amazing, wonderful evening. And I want to thank also the Worcester Black History Project for co-sponsoring this evening's presentation. You can find material about the Worcester Black History Project on its website. Lots of activities both there and here at the American Antiquarian Society. I want to mention one program that we have coming up in a couple of weeks on March 22nd, which is a Wednesday at 4 p.m. We have an online program, Phyllis Wheatley Peters in Material Memory, featuring several scholars and two of AAS's own curators spotlighting items here in our collection. This year, 2023, marks the 250th anniversary of the publication of Phyllis Wheatley's poems, her volume of poems, and so we have a series of programs this year, or part of a series of programs this year, commemorating that anniversary. Please tune in on March 22nd to look at these extraordinary materials and learn more about their meaning. We have many, many other programs coming up in the next several months. Some of them are hybrid, like this one, where you can either come to Antiquarian Hall or watch on YouTube. Others are on Zoom only. You can find them all at our website, americanantiquarian.org. You can also watch this program and other previous programs through our website on our YouTube channel. So we encourage you to keep track of what we're doing, watch more of our programs. But for now, thank you all so very much. Thank you to Ilyon Woo, and have a good evening.